Good evening. My name is Aaron Dushku. I am a town council member in this great town of Watertown, and I'm really happy to see everybody here. We're looking forward to a great event, so I'm here to welcome you. First off, I'm going to recognize some of my fellow elected officials and representatives in the room. We've got Miss Lisa Feltner, town councilor here. We've got Liz Usum, our school committee member. We've got Representative Hecht in the back right there, and representatives from our representatives, Lon, Emily Izzo, and from our Senator Brownsburger's office, Andrew Bettinelli. Wave, Andrew. We also have a representative from our Bikes PED committee here. We've got a few other committees represented, our Stormwater committee. We've got our MBTA Rider, what do you call your committee?
Rider Oversight Committee.
Rider Oversight Committee. And we've got Councillor Falkoff bringing up the rear, and we've got Jason Cohen from our ZBA, also great to see him here. And what's that? Yes, and last but not least, I wanted to introduce our committee. If you guys were following the election last year, you heard a lot of talk about transportation in Watertown, and as a result of that, it doesn't take a genius to realize that we have some issues here to work out, and Town Council President Mark Sedaris assigned a new committee of the council to work on specifically on this issue, and he made me the chair. My name is Aaron Dushku, and two of my fellow committee members are also here, and saving them for last, it's Vinnie Piccirilli and Tony Palumbo on the back table there. The three of us have worked really hard, I think, in the last since the year started, on a number of things with the town staff. You're going to hear from the town staff a little bit. We certainly appreciate their work, and with the Public Transit Task Force, DCDP, Department of Community Development and Planning, Watertown Public Transit Task Force, and the committee were the co-hosts and sponsors of this event tonight. We've all been thinking about these issues quite a bit. I want to just share with you something that the comprehensive plan says, and this is interpreted a few ways. There's a transportation section, and there's a recommendations area of that section, and it says transportation needs to be convenient, safe, aesthetically pleasing, and environmental friendly, as it meets the complex needs of residents and travelers. A comprehensive transportation plan, which both provides active and passive connectivity internally to neighborhoods within Watertown and to the greater region, is essential to ensure a sustainable system over the long term. So we're talking about transportation planning here tonight. There's a lot of communities in our near vicinity who are embarking on such activities, and we'd like to learn a little bit from them today. As far as the committee is concerned, we've taken on really important topics such as Transportation Management Association, which is a TMA. You'll hear some of these acronyms thrown around. Watertown is now forming a TMA. We should have our own shuttle buses on the ground. We're thinking by the end of the year, we're hoping. That's a very exciting thing that we've been working on. We're going to get a presentation from them coming up really soon this month to see how the progress is going on that. And a lot of our developers are kindly chipping in on that. Thank you for that. And there's also something called Transportation Demand Management, which is TMA, Transportation Management Association of all these businesses, is sometimes a component of transportation demand management. So TDM and TMA are acronyms that we're throwing around a lot nowadays in Watertown, and I hope you guys can get those sorted out in your head. And they may come up in the conversation tonight a little bit. TDM on the committee are their ways of measuring the impacts that certain developments have as far as single occupancy vehicles on our town, and implementing measures to control that impact and tracking it over time. The committee's working really hard to put together some ways of measuring that, some ways of monitoring that over time, and perhaps some consequences for not meeting the intended goals of reducing those numbers. So look forward to that from our committee and from the town staff in coming months as we keep working on that. So we've got the comprehensive plan, we've got TMA, we've got TDM, we've got transportation planning, which we're talking about tonight. And I'll turn it over now to the co-host and just say thank you so much for coming, everybody.
Thank you, Aaron. My name is Jonathan Bakian, and I didn't expect to have a role right now.
So glad you have a mic, John.
I'm going to turn this over directly to Ralph Danisco. Ralph is with the transportation planning firm of Nelson Nygaard. They are a national firm that does work internationally. So I give you Ralph Danisco.
All right, let me see if I can bring up this presentation. And thank you all for having me here tonight. What Jonathan and the task force had asked me to talk about is just a little bit of an overview of the different kinds of transportation planning efforts that you could undertake. And I've kind of organized them from smallest to biggest. I promise to throw a lot of additional acronyms and terms at you. If somebody doesn't understand them, or if you need a little bit more guidance, raise your hand. This is going to work much better as a conversation. I think what I'm hoping to get at the end of my piece and the rest of the panelists is that we've teed up a lot of questions in your mind, and we can have a little bit of a robust discussion as we go through this. So let's see. This should come on.
There we go.
All right, so as I said, I'm a consultant. I work for a company called Nelson Nygaard, where we have a large office here in Boston. We're a national company. We do multimodal transportation plans, and as I go through this, you'll understand what that means a little bit better. I want to start with just a couple of ways to think about transportation planning. The first is that it's really hard to think about it independently. It's integrally linked with land use planning, right? Nobody drives down a street or goes to a certain place because it's just easy to get around. It's all about trying to get to the places and create the sorts of places that you want to be, and the different types of land uses, and the character and the mix and the density of how those things are built out has an enormous impact on how people get around. If you think about a place like Watertown Square, is what we might call a park once environment, where you're going to park in the back here or maybe on the street and you're going to visit multiple places. You're going to operate a lot differently there than if you go out to Route 1 or Route 9 or someplace where you're going to park and go to this place and then you're going to get back in your car and drive to the next place. So when you think about just how those things work together and how they fit together, it has an enormous impact on the way that people actually behave. And then when you do your analysis, you have to build it around those things. And individual design elements can make a big difference, and in all sorts of ways. In a lot of cases, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, it's not necessarily the size of a development or of a project or the density. It's where are the access points and the driveways has a huge impact in what the effect and impact of that is on the surrounding streets. Ways that you design an individual roadway or street, believe it or not, have an enormous impact on what the kind of speed and the feel and the character of those streets are. And there's lots of things that you can do to impact those. And what we at Nelson Nygaard preach and approach just about every one of our transportation planning efforts from is think about it from the human perspective or the user perspective. You're all at varying times, a driver, a pedestrian, a cyclist, a transit rider, and you're interacting between all those things. You have to think about all the different choices that you make from when you wake up in the morning to where you have to go and how you're going to get there, and all of the factors that impact that, whether it's time and cost and ability and safety and comfort, and all of those things matter they matter from your individual choice, and they matter in terms of how you want to sort of design your city. So when you think about transportation planning, you want to plan for the things you want, not the things that you're afraid of. And I put these charts, is everybody familiar with the term level of service? You came to a transportation planning meeting, you're probably fairly sophisticated about that stuff. But the typical analytical measure is vehicular level of service, which is actually, it's given this letter grade and it means delay. So level of service A means that a car is not delayed or experiences very little delay at an intersection. So if you're designing to achieve that, you end up with something like you see on the left here. Whereas vehicle level of service F means the cars go really slow and it might take them a while to go through. might actually be the kinds of places that you want to create in different areas. So don't always be afraid of what that vehicle level of service is. Think about all the other implications of it. That's the kind of initial overview. Who is Nelson Nygaard? We live at that intersection, right? We live at that intersection of kind of creative, vibrant, sustainable, lively, active downtown places. And what we do as a company, what we do as transportation planners is try to bring all the different transportation modes together and understand how they interact with everything else that you're trying to achieve there. So what I'm going to walk you through now is just a little bit of a kind of overview of the different types of transportation planning efforts that a city or a town or a region or an agency may sort of undertake. And if you start on the left-hand side, you think about the very local kind of development impact. Somebody wants to build a drugstore, an apartment building, whatever, and how city or town or neighborhood reviews that all the way through to a citywide master plan, and the level of focus and detail that might occur kind of on each of those. So development review, impact requirements, how many people have heard, you can't build that, it's going to bring too much traffic, right? That sort of a thing is really what we're talking about here. And most towns have some sort of system set up, and there are state and national standards that look at how do you measure the actual impacts of that particular project. And the individual process to review those is going to differ by town, and in some cases it's really spelled out in detail, and in other places it's a little bit more general. But the level of detail that you go through for these things is very specific. You look at how many trips is it going to generate, how many vehicle trips is it going to generate, how do we look at where those driveways are and how that access works. Does this create or impact or solve or detract from other things that we're trying to achieve here? And how do municipalities integrate, regulate these things? A lot of it's built into the zoning code. In some cases, there's more specific review processes for projects over a certain size. There may be other codes that impact how you can build something. The ADA is Americans with Disabilities Act, so it's making sure things are accessible. Fire code requirements for street widths or lanes or things like that. And again, the sort of larger municipal plans. And try to put some fun pictures in here that show you how you end up having to deal with some of these things. And in a lot of cases, I'm going to show you examples from things we've worked on because I have slides for them. It's a little bit easier. But a municipality can build in development level guidelines for how you want certain projects, and you're not fighting these things or arguing them on a case-by-case basis, how you want those things to work. This is kind of an example from stuff we're doing in Somerville, Massachusetts, where you're looking at sharing parking between multiple uses in a mixed-use development. And I don't know if one of you guys is going to talk about the difficulties of getting mixed-use projects through zoning, but it's definitely something worth looking at. But sharing the use, sharing the parking, and you see the demand peaks by different times of day, and kind of how you might locate it, where you want it to be. You see in this kind of cartoonish example, the parking is hidden and the buildings are out along the street wall. That may be a principle that you want to sort of think about here. Another kind of level of effort is concept design. The first thing you would do when you're looking at an intersection or a small area and saying, this doesn't feel safe, or I can't get across the street, or I don't know how to make left turns here, or there's too much traffic here. How would you approach understanding and attacking that sort of an issue? And a lot of these we put kind of the level of detail that you would go through here. You do actually a fair amount of detail on a concept design level. You'd get traffic counts, you'd get pedestrian counts, you look at signal timing, you might even do surveying and try to understand everything that's going on here. And where do these come from? Why would a town want to do a concept design? As I said, there's some safety issue, there's some congestion issue. Everybody's been complaining about it for a long time, or sometimes it's part of something larger that you're trying to achieve. Here's an example in Bridgewater down in kind of southeastern Massachusetts, where actually as part of a little bit of a downtown plan, one of the things we had to look at was how the circulation around the central square should work, and particular issues with truck traffic and access. So here's again an example where we took a number of concepts and made a few recommendations for how that could be improved. Another type of study is a kind of a specific mode plan, whether it's a transit plan or a parking plan or a bicycle plan, and you may be undertaking some of these things right now, where you're just saying, how do we get bicycling to work better here in Watertown? And these tend to be a little bit broader based. They're more citywide. We actually do a lot of specific transit plans. So here in Watertown, you would say, is the MBTA serving our needs appropriately? Are we getting to all the places that we need to go? Do we have service on the corridors where people need it the most? And there's a fair level of detail that you can develop in a transit plan, but you're still doing it at a little bit of a higher level and making kind of larger recommendations about, understanding that you have the right connections and levels of service in place. We also do a lot of specific parking plans, and we find, especially when we're looking at downtowns, it's the parking more than the traffic, more than anything else, that ends up driving the discussion. Right? If you can deal with the parking, you can sort of understand everything else. You can develop a fair amount of detail around how you do parking plans. We do detailed inventories, we do detailed parking utilization counts, we see how many people are using different spaces at different times. We look at how the regulations are worked. And one of the beauties of parking plans is the city often has a lot of control about how the parking works. How much you charge for the spaces, what times they're in effect, what are the time limits, how those can operate, how do you access them, how do you, we want employees to park here and long-term parking here and want this parking available for others. We also do traffic circulation plans. This is an example in Hull, Massachusetts, where along kind of the entrance to the main peninsula near Nantasket Beach, we're trying to convert a number of those streets from one-way to two-way. And we look at all the implications of what that means. Are we going to increase delay? Are we going to improve access? Can we create new parcels or different development opportunities? Can we improve safety by doing that sort of analysis? So this is a little bit higher level, and often these lead to further, more detailed design efforts. Again, there's just some examples of kind of how you might look at those traffic volumes. There's also neighborhood transportation plans where you're not looking at a specific mode, but you're looking at how they all interact within a certain area. And again, the impetus for these could be often, there's a whole bunch of development that's planned here, and we don't know how the whole system's going to work together. The beauty of doing a kind of neighborhood plan is that you can look at how all those pieces combine. You can look at the opportunities to create synergies between different land uses. You can look at people parking here and walking to here and taking transit from here. So it's a little bit of a higher level of analysis. And again, this is a plan in, look at the downtown in Windsor, Connecticut. There's a transit station just over to the right. There's a neighborhood over to the left. We looked at punching through a couple of additional streets so that you're spreading the traffic around. We looked at opportunities to create parking in front of some of the business opportunities. And again, at a neighborhood planning level, you can be very specific, but you're doing it in terms of kind of in service of larger goals that you're developing. Similar approaches happen on a corridor level, and often this is a case where, let's take Arsenal Street here, where you've got a number of larger things that are developing, and this is again a place where you need to look at it in the context of the land use that's happening here. What happens if we put housing here and offices here and all these other pieces? How much can we build? How much can the system support? Where do those access points have to be? We're doing a similar effort here in Leawood, Kansas, just outside of Kansas City, where, believe it or not, half this is developed and looks like like a legacy place, and the other half of it is cornfields. They're trying to figure out sort of how this all builds out. And one of the things you do is look at how you want those streets to function. Actually, I'm going to talk about this on a sort of another example here, where you do more of a streets plan. Some work that we're doing in Columbus, Ohio. This is their downtown, where we took a look at a little bit of a higher level at each of the streets and developed a functionality for them so that certain streets are more designed to carry people. That's where we want the cars to go. That's where we want the high-capacity bus service to go. And other streets have a much more kind of neighborhood orientation with local serving retail. And other streets even lower level, where that's where you want your driveway access and your loading and things like that to occur from. And all this leads up to the sort of larger level plan that you can do is a citywide transportation plan, which is really more about sort of setting the kind of policy for how you want transportation to work. You'll look at bigger questions. James may talk about this. We're doing something similar in Newton right now for that town. We're trying to deal with bigger picture issues and understand, are we connecting to the right places? Where are the hot spots in town? Where are the pinch points? And these are things that a typical impetus you may do because you've got a new mayor, or because you're trying to update it every few years and understand and make sure that your policies are in place. We're doing a similar effort for Boston right now, the Go Boston 2030 plan, and also trying to prioritize a number of high-level projects. These 5 or 6 or 10 things are going to have the biggest impact on transportation in a particular city. And the last version is a citywide master plan, which is not just looking at transportation, but it's looking at transportation and land use and any number of other factors, and sort of setting the goals for how you want it to work. And the transportation side is looking at it, making sure that you have the right infrastructure and network and systems in place. Here, again, another example, we're working in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And oftentimes those plans have a few detailed focus areas where you can sort of show what those policies might mean on the street level. So again, just summary going from lowest to highest of the types of planning efforts that are there. I'd love to talk about these in more detail. I think these gentlemen will talk about some of the efforts that they're doing here locally. We can talk and bring more examples of individual places or understanding about how you do these or what their costs are or how you make the trade-offs that are associated with them. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ralph. Our plan for this evening, you have an agenda on the piece of paper that we're giving out as you came in. So our plan for this evening was to have, or is to have, Ralph give the overview about these different transportation planning tools and techniques, and then look at 3 municipalities and hear about what is actually going on in those municipalities. And we're very fortunate to have folks from our neighbors in Newton and Waltham. And our next speaker is James Frias, and he is going to, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and he's going to be telling us about what they're doing in Newton. Oh, James, I didn't introduce you with your title, so please.
I'll go right ahead. Very close. So good evening. So my name is James Frias. I'm the Deputy Director of Planning for the City of Newton. And is it all right if I close this?
Actually,
Or should I leave it up?
just leave it up.
Okay, leave it up.
The dangerous situation.
All right. So it's fantastic to see this many people out to talk about transportation, really just have this opening conversation about transportation in Watertown. Frankly, we sometimes are struggling to get people interested in transportation. We're engaged in a citywide transportation plan, really just as Ralph was describing. He kind of stole my whole show right there. That's exactly what we're doing. But I can try and provide a little more details. Our effort really initiated probably about 2 years ago, when the mayor and I sat down and were talking with a group of people about what are the kind of big issues we're facing in Newton right now, and it really boiled down to us around housing and transportation, and a recognition that we couldn't deal with those issues separately, much as Ralph said a minute ago about land use and transportation being very connected. Thank you. We couldn't really have a conversation about housing in Newton, about adding additional housing in Newton, if we also didn't have a conversation about how are we going to improve our transportation system and make sure that we could offer transportation choices for people and have really enhanced mobility for the city. As Ralph said, anytime we talk about a development project, one of the first things we hear about is where the impact's going to be on transportation. So we initiated 2 studies just about simultaneously. One of those is a housing strategy project, which we are right in the process of wrapping up right now. And then the second one was a citywide transportation strategy. We call this project Newton in Motion, and we really really would welcome you to go to our website and check out all the work we've done thus far. It's just, if you just Google Newton in Motion, you'll find your way there. The objective of the project, as I said a minute ago, is really to look for ways to enhance mobility for all citizens in Newton, also for our businesses, for our employers and their employees, and really to expand transportation choices. I think we're trying to recognize that we're not going to solve all of Newton's transportation problems with cars. Quite frankly, that we have to look at all modes of transportation and present alternative options. So we hired Nelson Nygaard. And they came in, and so far we've had really a fantastic process and a fantastic level of involvement and interest in what we're doing. We started out really front-loading a lot of community engagement. How do we, or what are the needs? What is it? What the people are concerned about? What are the hot spots in the city, particularly? So we did a 2.5-day open house workshop in an empty storefront down on Needham Street in Newton, and we had a massive snowstorm. But we also had somewhere between 80 and 100 people who came out to talk to us about transportation in Newton, and they came out and they looked at maps with us, and they identified those places where they walk, where they bike, where they drive, and what were the problems that they saw, what were the issues that were raised there. And they helped us think about what were our overall goals and what is our vision for transportation in Newton. And our next step coming out of that was the development of what we're calling a fact book and a vision statement. I left it there on my desk, but if you just hold up the cover for me. This is on our website. It's about 100 pages long, and it has a huge amount of information in it. A lot of it that you would expect. Where are people in Newton driving to? They're driving into Boston for work, vast majority of them. And the vast majority of people are driving single occupancy vehicles. Same is true for the workers who are coming to Newton. We do have a better transit share than many other communities in our area, but overall, it's single occupancy vehicles. Some of the other things that we found out that were interesting was that our highest rate of bike use was actually coming out of Newton Corner, which was surprising. Newton Corner is not the place I would necessarily think of to go ride my bike. But logically, it's within a reasonable bike shed of most of the job centers in Boston. It's roughly 6 miles from the center of Boston, which is about as far as most people are willing to bike on a regular basis. The more that we can enhance that infrastructure, particularly in that area, the greater chance we see of being able to get more people in that area biking. Some of the other things we saw is that our express bus is in fact very popular, something that most of us didn't really know much about. We knew that people use the Green Line, we knew people using the commuter rail, but we didn't know much about the express bus. And we also found, surprisingly, that 9% of our population, our working population at least, is actually telecommuting, which means they're not using at least during heavy, intense peak hours, using our transportation system at all. So what are we getting out of this transportation plan? There are really 4 primary deliverables that we've asked Nelson Nygaard to produce for us. One is an active transportation plan. This is the part that's focused on pedestrians and biking. And it comes down to, really it's going to come down to a map and identifying some key things that we can get going on quickly for the biggest impact. The second item is cars and parking. We're not ignoring this issue. In fact, I'm going to talk a little bit more about parking in a second. But what are the things that we can do to identify congestion hotspots, identify those areas that are causing the most problems for people, and find solutions, reasonable solutions for fixing them. And then the third one is transit, particularly focused on what are the transit options that we can introduce that we can actually control locally. Because we recognize the MBTA isn't rolling in all the cash that we may think they're rolling in. They don't have a lot of money. The more we ask them for additional services, the more we're probably beating our heads against a wall. So we're trying to identify what are the things that we can do in Newton, particularly on that last mile issue, if people are familiar with that issue. How do we get people from their jobs, from their homes, to the existing MBTA transit system? The other thing we recognize about working on transit in particular, but really transportation broadly, is that we're not going to really, Newton isn't actually going to make much headway by itself. So we've reached out to our neighboring municipalities. We've reached out to Watertown and Waltham, Brookline, Needham. We're trying to bring Wellesley into the fold as well, to work on what are the things that we can do together, particularly on transit. Particularly, what are the ways that we can connect our transit systems, so create more local-oriented transit options and connect them. One of the fourth deliverable is really the biggest deliverable, and that's all about implementation. Because one of the things we recognize is many of the ideas we're coming up with about enhanced bike infrastructure, about driving better in the city, all those things, are things that people have talked about before. These are ideas that have been on the table before, but we haven't made much headway on them. So what do we need to do to make better transportation decision-making and make these projects move forward? How do we organize ourselves as a city, as staff, as a city council, as transportation activists? How do we organize and move these projects forward better? And that's where a lot of our thinking is going to be. We have a lot of committees, we have a lot of processes, but how do we make these processes more efficient and actually move us forward on making these various projects happen? So that's a big deal, and that's going to be a lot of our conversation. So where are we in the process? We think we're about halfway through. One of the exciting things we just did is a big demonstration project. Maybe some of you guys drove through Newtonville last weekend, Friday or Saturday. We took the intersections of Walnut and Washington Street, and we did a big demonstration project. What would it look like if we introduced some of these ideas that we're talking about into this intersection? Bump outs, bike lanes, what else did we better defined the transit stops, and we did it all for basically 2 straight days. We used straw wattles, which are basically these tubes filled with straw, and we created new curb lines. We took chalk paint, which is temporary, washes right off, and we painted these bike lanes. We painted big, huge, wide crosswalks that really encompassed a large amount of the intersection as well. And then we sat out there and we asked people what they thought about it. We had in-person surveys. We got right around 200 survey responses over the course of those 2 days. And we estimate that we talked to collectively more than 1,000 people. And we got a lot of positive feedback. We had a lot of people say where we put in a new bump out where there's an existing crosswalk, wow, I feel so much safer crossing this street in this location because I can walk all the way out here and get out past where the cars are parked, and people see me and they're actually stopping, and they don't normally stop for me. Where the bicyclists were thrilled, they had a safe lane. If anyone's ever driven over that bridge that goes over the pike there, it's a huge, wide bridge, and a lot of bicyclists don't feel safe because of the speeds and because of the curvature of the bridge that interrupts sight lines going over that bridge as in its current condition. So a lot of even adult bicyclists go over and they get on the sidewalk and they bike over. With the bike lanes there, they were all using the bike lanes and commenting about how much safer it felt and how much better it felt. And we had our fire department drive around the whole thing and do every single turn, every single drive, and make sure that they could do it at the speed they felt they needed to. And it worked. It worked beautifully. We weren't necessarily happy about it, but it worked beautifully.
They didn't believe it, even while they're doing it.
So, and I think that's been one of the lessons is this level of engagement has actually really carried us. It's been really important to this effort, and particularly getting past, quite frankly, the typical people who come out. We have the people who are dead set against bike lanes, and we have the people who are really into bike lanes, and both of them come to our meetings. But what we're not talking to is that whole big group of people in the middle that really just want the transportation system to work better. So being out on the street meant that we talked to a lot of those people, and that was really great. So I said I wanted to get back to parking. Another project that we did early on was a parking strategy just for Newton Center, with the idea that the lessons learned in that effort could go and be used in other parts of the city. And since that project is complete, I can talk a little bit about the results. There were some really interesting findings. One of them was there's a street in Newton Center, if anyone's familiar, Union Street, runs right by the Green Line station, and it's always parked up, right? Our data shows that it's more than 90% parked up every single day, all day long. Starts early in the morning, goes well into the evening. What we found is 40% of those people parking there were likely employees, because we looked at license plates, and even though it's a 2-hour limit, the average car was parking in a space for close to 4 hours, and when they did move, they moved a couple spots over. So what does that tell us? And that was true in other parts of the district, but it was particularly true there, where everyone was complaining there's no place to park, and it turns out it was all everybody's own employees that were doing it. So it told us we needed to find options and alternatives for employees. And so we're looking at options that would allow employees to get a permit to park in adjacent neighborhoods all day. They would pay for that permit, and what we hope to be able to do is actually take the money we get from those permits and turn it around towards sidewalks and pedestrian improvements in those neighborhoods and connecting those neighborhoods into the center and to the T. We're also looking at parking lots that are on more of the fringes of Newton Center that, again, we would create a situation where employees can essentially get a permit, pay for a permit for parking in those lots. And then the other big thing that we're doing is we're going to really let price control the utilization of parking in Newton Center. What I mean is we're going to take away the time limits. Or at least that's what we're proposing to do in this strategy. We're going to take away the time limits. We're creating 3 zones. In the center zone, parking is going to be about $1 an hour, which is a 25-cent increase over where it is right now. This is at least where we're going to start. In the next zone out, it'll be 75 cents, and then outside of that, it'll continue to be free. But the idea is that if we want Newton Center to be welcoming to people, then we really don't want to kick them out after 2 hours. We want them to stay, and we want them to continue shopping as long as they want to continue shopping. But what we are going to do is we're going to charge people more for the most convenient spaces and allow that to be the incentive that leads to turnover. A key aspect of that study was identifying a metric and saying basically on every single street we want to have 10 to 15% of the parking spaces, depending on the street, 10 to 15% of the parking spaces available at any given time. And we're going to use price, we're going to use other mechanisms to hit that target. So we're going to count the parking availability every year, perhaps even in some cases more often than that. And as long as we're hitting that target, we can leave things the same, but if we start to exceed that target, if we start to see parking exceed, then we can up the price and see if that leads to the parking becoming available. The other thing we're doing is going to a pay-by-phone app, which actually folks will see being rolled out in Newton, this week. That's great. So by July 1st, we're going to be all pay-by-phone. And that point about the metrics is important because we've also incorporated that into our transportation strategy. We're going to be identifying a key set of metrics that measure our progress towards goals, and using that to track progress and doing that in a very public way so that people can see how we're doing and see how we're doing in meeting the goals we've established in that transportation strategy. So we're aiming for a final completion of our transportation strategy, final report out in December. We're going to be having some early action items identified as early as October so we can incorporate those into our CIP. And I think that about wraps it up for what's going on with our transportation strategy. So I look forward to the end and answering questions.
Thanks, James. And as James said, we will have a question and answer period after all of the presentations, so I'm sure there'll be lots of good questions. Mike Garvin is the transportation engineer for the city of Watertown, our neighbor on the other side. He's going to tell us about what they're doing there.
Great, thank you. I did bring handouts. I wish I had them in the format to have them up on the screen, but unfortunately, I way underestimated the crowd here. I didn't bring enough. I will pass them out if people can share. Maybe that will kind of spread them out to the room. Okay, again, my name is Michael Garvin. I'm the traffic engineer for the city of Waltham. And I'm going to share with you the experience we have now about what we're doing for our transportation master plan. And I think you're going to hear that I'm echoing a lot of what you've heard already. But of course, every community is different, and you'll see there are some differences with the way we're approaching things. So about a year and a half ago is when we first hired a firm to assist us with the Transportation Master Plan. McMahon Associates is the firm that we hired. And the first step is always the data collection. So they went out, they did traffic counts at 91 intersections across the city. They reviewed accident history. They got data from the MBTA about transit use, how many people board at each bus stop in the whole city, and we did parking studies. Every pedestrian and bike studies, every aspect you could think of that could go into the Transportation Master Plan. So from that data, we had a public meeting last, I think it was October or November, that was very well attended. I think a couple hundred people showed up to that, and the consultants presented basically the data that they found. So again, everything from vehicles, pedestrian, bicycles, transit, safety, everything citywide. And they boiled it down to 20 intersections and 4 corridors that they're studying for traffic recommendations. And then they also have recommendations that they're developing for the other aspects, the pedestrian, the bikes, the transit, the parking. The parking, obviously, is key to our community, as I'm sure it is for yours. And then they developed the recommendations, presented that at another public meeting about a month ago, where we had it in a big auditorium, and we posted all of the recommendations, the draft recommendations, up on the wall. People had the chance to come up and look at the plans really close, and then we had the presentation for the overall recommendations, and we opened the comment period to the public. You can go online. What I handed out here is some slides from that, and you can review them closely and then submit your comments. If you see from the first page, several of the locations are adjacent to Watertown, so those are the ones I printed out just to show you an example of some of the intersection recommendations that they're making. And I invite you to, if you have comments, please go to the Waltham website and submit them before the end of June. We're happy to receive them. So just as an example, I'll go through the ones that I handed out. And for each location, McMahon Associates is making some short-term recommendations, some long-term recommendations. This is going to help the city, at the end, prioritize what's going to be the most important things for us to do in the next 10 to 15 years as we develop what our traffic strategy will be. So the first one to show is the intersection of Beaver Street and Warren Street. It's really a wide-open intersection now, controlled by a stop sign. So they'll make some short-term recommendations for striping, some signs, moving bus stops, things like that, to do some short-term remedies. But in the long term, they do recommend a traffic signal at that location, tighten up the intersection, kind of control the movements a little bit better, things like that. Flipping over, Main Barbara Gore, right on the Watertown line. I'm sure you're familiar with the awkwardness of that intersection. I've lived in this area for quite a long time. I've worked for the city for 4 years. I'm a traffic engineer for the city. I drive up Gore Street. I make the right turn, trying to turn up towards Warren Street, and I still don't quite know the right thing to do. So if I'm confused, I'm sure 99.9% of the people are confused. So obviously something needs to be done there. So they do make some short-term recommendations, but I like to skip to the long-term recommendations there. That they're recommending to eliminate that right turn channel that causes a lot of the confusion. Probably put it a little right turn lane that would be over at the signal in front of the Shell gas station. Retime the signals to kind of make them operate a little bit better, and add some bike lanes through that as well. So just as an example to make that location a little bit more logical and safe and better operations. Okay, the next one that's on the border here is Grove Street, Gore Street, Ceylon Street, currently an all-way stop. They do recommend some new signage as the short-term recommendations, and then again for long-term to signalize that location. So that is a recommendation. And with every recommendation they give, it's obviously going to not be, this isn't what's going to happen. So this is going to start the discussion, and it kind of gives the city some direction on ways to go to improve traffic conditions. Not everyone's going to agree that a traffic signal is the right thing at that location. So this starts the conversation. After the master plan is complete, we're going to pick select projects to go into more detail, and this would be one that would obviously need some more study to see what the final projects are that the city is going to accomplish. And the last one that's right on the border is it is technically not in our master plan, but I did want to share it with you because this is something that's going to be reconstructed soon due to the new development that was at the corner of Farwell Street and River Street. As part of the special permit for that development, they have contributed money to redo that signal. So in the next few months or so, we're going to start the process of improving that signal and probably tying it into the signal that's down the road at Willow Street to give a little bit better progression along River Street, which leads right into Watertown. So those are some of the examples of intersection improvements. They've talked about some of the corridors. I'm going to share one with you if you're familiar with Lexington Street, which is the north-south street between the center of Waltham and the center of Lexington. The traffic counts on that street that the consultant did showed that north of Totten Pond Road, there really isn't the volume of traffic to justify the four-lane cross-section that we have now. So if you're driving, I drive on that road every day, and I grip the steering wheel really tight because it's not the most pleasant road to drive on. Southbound, there is the need for the two-lane southbound that we have today. So the recommendation was to eliminate one northbound lane once you get north of Totten Pond Road, which gives you the room to add some bike lanes. There are a lot of bicyclists on that road, believe it or not. They're braver than I am. But this would create a safer condition. It would slow traffic down in the northbound direction. So we actually, given the fact that we're going to be repaving that road in the next year or two, we kind of fast-tracked that recommendation, got it before Traffic Commission, got Traffic Commission to actually approve that change, and when we repave the road, we're going to implement that new striping plan. That, a lot of, at this point, the challenge is going to be kind of convincing people that change is good. And especially eliminating a lane is something that's going to be beneficial for traffic or moving people around, which is transportation. So that's going to be a challenge to convince people that it's the right thing to do. But I look forward to that challenge. Getting back to parking, they did make some preliminary recommendations for parking in our downtown, and I guess not surprisingly, the recommendation is, in some ways, Waltham is doing things a little bit backwards. If you're familiar with Moody Street, which is our busiest street, what we now have is time-limited on the street, but free parking. So you're limited to 1 hour on the street on Moody Street. The parking lots are set back from the street, a block away, and there, if you park there, you pay 50 cents an hour. The recommendation is you really need to treat the on-street spaces as your premium spaces. You want to encourage that turnover. You want to move the employees to where they should be parking. We're likely getting the same kind of things going on in Waltham that Newton's experiencing, for the employees really taking up the space that you really want your customers to be in. So McMahon Associates has made some great recommendations about implementing paid parking on the street, making that your premium rate. The lots would be a cheaper rate, and then provide what they recommend is free parking for employees at the remote sections of the parking lot. So it's all about managing your parking, providing the turnover needed for the businesses, right on the street, which is a business-friendly way to go. So I think that's kind of a summary of where we are. The next steps are, by the end of the summer into the fall, they're going to finish a draft report that's submitted to the city. It'll be presented to the elected officials. There'll be a public meeting for that, take comments at that point, and then wrap up the whole report by probably mid to late fall. So that's where we are now. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Our next speaker is our own Steve Magoon, our Assistant Town Manager and the Head of the Department of Community Development and Planning, to talk about what's been happening and maybe a little look to the future about what might be happening here in Watertown.
Thank you, Jonathan. Pleasure to be here, and I certainly appreciate all of you for coming out and spending the evening here talking about transportation planning. A couple of things I wanted to note. One is, I don't think there's anywhere in the country, any time, rural, urban, doesn't matter, if there's a project proposed or a community meeting, traffic is always going to be part of the topic. It is always part of the topic, always something to discuss. And I think that's important. It's something that people feel very strongly about. It's something that affects them on a daily basis and is important. It's also an important aspect of safety and how safe people feel getting around their community. So it's an important component. Another note I wanted to make before I got into some of the details, I liked Ralph's comparison of a level of service A and a level of service F, the level of service A being the wide expanse of asphalt with a couple of vehicles, and the level of service F being a nice co-use facility with vehicles and pedestrians and rollerbladers. Unfortunately, at a recent chamber event, I tried to sort of evoke that image. I'm not sure I was quite so successful because I described it as congestion's not always a bad thing, which kind of got a few chuckles and a few moans. So I like your comparison. It's probably a little more effective than the one I used. Yeah, I will. So the first thing I want to talk about from Watertown's perspective is our comprehensive plan. So I like to think of this on Ralph's continuum of planning efforts, transportation planning efforts. We're at the end with our comprehensive plan, although I would certainly readily admit from a transportation perspective, it's not the level of detail and the fine level of grain that a lot of transportation planning efforts might involve. But I do think it has that broad overall look at the community, at our transportation facilities, all the different modes and how important they are and how we evaluate those. And obviously, it's recently adopted in 2015, something that involved a lot of community input, a lot of community engagement. A lot of you, I'm sure, in the room were active participants in that effort. In terms of its content, in the interest of time, I only put up the 6 goals in terms of its implementation strategies, and a broad title to those goals, which obviously have a lot more content behind those. The first one being traffic calming. And for a lot of people, traffic calming might not make a lot of sense. It might be a little counterintuitive. But the concept of traffic calming is a very important one. Studies show that the rate of accidents increased dramatically with the speed of vehicles, but probably even more importantly, the severity of those accidents and the severity of the injuries, both in terms of personal of injuries, but also of your vehicle and the type of damage you do, dramatically increase with speed. And the primary idea behind traffic calming is to slow down traffic, not necessarily reduce volume or reduce capacity, how many people can get through a road in a particular period of time, but to slow it down and make it more safe, make it more hospitable environment for all of us. And so a lot of the comprehensive plan implementation strategies talk about implementing traffic calming, particularly in our residential neighborhoods. Next one is expanding mass transit. Obviously, we're in a situation where we, to the extent that we have mass transit and MBTA service, it is very well utilized. I've worked in jurisdictions where we've tried to figure out how we're going to get people to use mass transit. We don't have that problem here. The problem here we have is getting MBTA to provide more capacity. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Next one's pedestrian and bicycle policies. Obviously, that's an important mode related beyond just the vehicle travels, but the other modes and how we're going to accommodate those. Next one, roadway infrastructure improvement policies, and there we're talking about the capital projects that we do and making those consistent with our other policies. Roadway congestion and efficiency policies. Here we're talking about really monitoring the traffic on our facilities and our road network and trying to focus development in areas where we can most effectively serve that and address those capacity issues, as well as preserving those other areas of the community where we're not focusing development. And then alternative and reduced parking strategies. Here, again, we're trying to accomplish a reduction in single occupant vehicle and therefore traffic on our facilities. So a couple of things I want to talk about. One, project reviews. Obviously, staff works with applicants, works with the community, as well as third-party consultants to evaluate projects that come before the town and to both analyze the impacts that those projects will have, but also to appropriately mitigate those impacts that they'll have on our community. I think probably one of the more important things that we've done more recently in terms of mitigating those impacts is not just look at the standard, again, level of service analysis of turning movements within intersections, but also looking at the broader context of the network and the community around that, and how can we take steps to mitigate and, again, calm traffic in those residential neighborhoods, discourage it from taking place in those residential areas, and really focus it back on the major corridors, and take steps to do that. And again, hopefully have the projects bear the brunt of that. The example is a drawing of the Arsenal Street corridor, again, one that's seen some pretty significant changes recently, and obviously will continue to. Another thing I want to talk a little bit about is some of our regional efforts. Clearly, transportation is an issue that doesn't stop at our municipal borders. It's one that affects all of us and across the region. Probably the majority of traffic in Watertown doesn't come from or end in Watertown, but travels through Watertown. So it's important that we think about these things from a regional perspective. And as staff to the town, I think it's important that we be present and participate in those efforts. So, as has already been mentioned to some extent tonight, actually by a couple of our speakers, we have been participating in and being a part of the Go Boston 2030 transportation planning effort. We were invited by Newton to come participate in their transportation plan, and did so. We also have been an active participant in Charles River Mill District, and I think that's an example where particularly Mayor Warren from Newton recognized that municipalities individually are not always as effective as they might be in terms of attracting state or federal dollars to do transportation projects, that if we look at transportation impacts, which obviously, as I've already said, are regional, it makes sense for us as municipalities to look at what transportation projects make the most sense and to, in effect, pool our efforts to get the resources to address those. And the Charles River Mill District, I think, is a good example of that, where we've brought together a number of jurisdictions to try and pool our efforts and get resources to address some of those transportation issues. A very quick example of the effectiveness of working together as municipalities is the Bridge Street, which, from our Pleasant Street corridor, Bridge Street goes into Newton. There was some issues with the coordination of the signals and the lane assignments, and because of that, it was very congested. Working together, the two towns coordinated the signals, made some lane adjustments, and I think it operates much more effectively since those things have taken place. Some other, from the regional perspective or broader perspective, we obviously spent a lot of time, both DPW and Planning and Development, working with the MBTA, as well as, our local groups, the transit rider advocacy groups. The MBTA, as has already been stated tonight, is under some significant pressures, and that's unfortunate, but again, we need to continue to advocate for the resources and the services that we need here. And, it goes beyond that as well. We obviously deal with a lot of issues on a day-to-day basis, things that come up, and it's important to have that interaction with the agency, making contacts. Similarly with Mass DOT, I spent a lot of time interacting with them, both on specific projects and addressing issues. Also, very active participants in some of the broader corridor studies. We've already talked a lot about, again, on that continuum of tools that we can do for transportation planning, looking at the broad spectrum and focusing further down. The corridor study for Arsenal Street, again, where obviously a lot of development activity is being focused, getting the state to bring those resources in to do a pretty substantial transportation analysis of that corridor has been important, and obviously we've been very involved with that, and they hope to wrap that up in the coming year. Mount Auburn Street Fresh Pond Parkway is another DCR study where, again, looking at ways to address the transportation challenges in that corridor. I think it's one that has a lot of challenges, and I'll be very curious to see what the consultants are able to come up with as solutions. Which brings us back more to the local level and some of the things that we've been doing. I think the first one and the most significant one in my mind is creating a Transportation Management Association. Again, earlier, Councilor Dushku mentioned TMA and the acronym. I think it's really important tool for us as a municipality to say, how can we address some of these transportation impacts that may be even broader, but that we're not able to garner the resources to address? Well, a Transportation Management Association helps us to do that. Pretty much all large projects have been conditioned to participate in it, not only to be a participant, but be a participant financially, meaning they're going to help us pay for creating the shuttle service. And they will, quite frankly, pay the vast burden of that. I think the municipality, Watertown, will continue to be a participant, for a lot of reasons, not only because we want to have some involvement and level of control, but probably more importantly because we want to serve the public. And if we want to serve the public as well as these individual projects, then I think it makes sense for us to be a paying customer as well. So we will be starting that shuttle service soon. We initially were talking about the fall, and that may still happen depending on exactly how we decide to organize it, but certainly in the very near future we will have shuttle service running within Watertown, which will help alleviate some of those traffic impacts and alleviate some of those capacity issues that our customers, our residents have associated with MBTA. I think the other part of the Transportation Management Association is significant as it can coordinate some of the other efforts around transportation demand management, the other acronym that the councilor mentioned, some of the other tools that you might use to try and reduce single occupant vehicles as one person driving the car by themselves. Things like parking policies, things like guaranteed ride homes where you have carpools, or other ways to encourage people to drive or to get to work other than driving by themselves. And there are a lot of tools that can be used and have proven to be successful. So having an organization that can organize that and encourage that is important. Obviously our town road projects are important. I think in the example of Waltham, they talked about some specific recommendations for intersection improvements and those types of things. Obviously, our annual capital improvement program is another important component of our transportation planning, where we are talking about reconstructing roads, we're talking about adding sidewalks or replacing sidewalks, talking about taking particular sections of roads that might be in bad shape and repairing those. Those are all important pieces of the transportation network. Also, on the broader spectrum, the TIP, which is the state, in effect, the state capital improvement program, we've been very successful in getting projects in Watertown funded through that, basically state and federal funding. Some of the more recent examples of those are the 3 intersection projects where 3 intersections in town were reconstructed, and the Pleasant Street corridor, which again was a pretty substantial project. The next project that we are queuing up for TIP consideration is the Mount Auburn corridor, and I think early on it's been listed as probably the number 2 priority project within those being requested by communities. So I think that still puts us out quite a ways, but is something that would likely move up and be a priority. Those are some images from that project. With that, I certainly appreciate the opportunity, and we'll look forward to the question and answer.
Thanks, Steve. I would, before we go to the questions and answers, and I would also, when we do that, I'll invite our panelists to ask each other questions as well as you're asking them questions. I just want to acknowledge there are 2 additional town councilors who are here. Mark Sedaris, the town council president, Angie Canales, district councilor. I want to thank all the councilors who are here for being here. Any evening when there isn't a meeting where they could be at. I'd also just like to put in a plug for the Watertown Public Transit Task Force. We're a citizen advocacy or an advocacy organization around public transit and transportation. We're open to anyone who lives or works in Watertown. I hope you got one of these yellow cards as you came in. And if you're interested in finding out more about the Public Transit Task Force or joining us, fill in your name and your email address. And also you can use the back of the card to give us any comments about this forum. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/WPTTF. Just one other bit of housekeeping. I do want to thank the other Transit Task Force volunteers, Judy Reynolds-Kohler, Mark Peterson, and Elliot Friedman for helping in the production of this forum tonight. And I also want to acknowledge Gideon Schreiber from DCTP for putting a lot of work on this also. So, time for questions, and I'll bring the mic over to you so everybody can hear your question. And just raise your hand when you want to ask something. I guess I just like to start with the question of when you've got so many different projects and so many different problem areas, how do you prioritize, and how do you figure out how to make your solutions, if you will, work together in the absence of a comprehensive planning process, given that resources are limited? So I'll just throw that out there. Any,
You want me to go first? That's one of the biggest challenges, is, when some of the larger plans are in place, a citywide plan, a transportation plan, what those really are priority setting documents. You go through that process to say, this is more important than that. And you're saying it somewhat emphatically, so that on an individual basis, after the fact, when there's a new development or a new project or some opportunity, you've got those priorities already spelled out. In the absence of that, it's more difficult, and what the job that many of these gentlemen have here is very difficult, because you're establishing those priorities on a project-by-project or a case-by-case basis. If you think about the sorts of street designs that they were talking about, those are really priority-setting exercises, right? A street is a public space that has demands on it for vehicles, for pedestrians, for bicyclists, for transit users, for access to the adjacent land use. And, each of those things have certain demands on a block, on a street, on a whatever. And trying to balance all those things can be incredibly difficult. And, you guys are facing that every day on all sorts of different projects. And I think from an outside point of view, the hope would be that the winner isn't the person who screams the loudest or the group that, is the most conservative or reactive, but somehow in there you can balance out all those different priorities. What I was talking about earlier about the ability to pull all those things together and understand how, where the driveways are and where you cross the street and where you wait for the bus all have to work together, and you have to think about it as a system, because that's the way real individual humans interact with the system. And you have to build that in. You guys are facing this on a regular basis without a higher level of priority. It's not easy.
I think I would add to that, I agree very much, but I think I would add to that the nature of planning is that you never are starting with a clean slate. You're never, starting at the start line and ending at the finish line. It's never that simple. Things are always overlapping and, starting too early or finishing too late or whatever. So I think it's always a challenge to try and meld things together as best you can. Having said that, one other thing I'll add is that I think people tend to view particularly project reviews as incremental and in isolation. And I think that Gideon and our staff and our consultants do an excellent job of making sure that we continue to take into account and consideration all the other things that are going on in town, so that they are taken into account and cumulative in terms of how we evaluate that. So we're not just looking at one project individually, we're looking at that plus all the other things that have gone on prior to the best that we can.
Okay, so, yes, Marcia, let me just bring the mic to you.
I have a question. I heard that the next fiscal year is going to have we're going to be able to hire a transportation planner. My question is, when would that person be hired and start, and what would that person be charged with doing? Because listening to, for instance, James talk about what Newton is doing, which is a whole more of a kind of comprehensive look at traffic. Is that the kind of thing this person will be doing? What will he be charged?
Good question. So,
Or she.
Exactly. Well, the easy answer for me would be, well, I'm not sure yet because we're still working on that, but of course that'd be a little bit of a cop-out. But we are working on a job description for that person, both in consultation with the personnel office, but also, other agencies in town. And, I think it's important that we incorporate all the different aspects of transportation planning. I tend to look at something like a job description as being broad and then taking best advantage of the best talent we can find and what that talent brings to the table. I know that probably sounds a little vague and like, okay, so you're just going to do whatever. But I think that is important in terms of how you utilize staff resources. We are working on the job description now. I would expect to have that out shortly. Obviously the money's not available until July, so I wouldn't be able to hire somebody until July anyway, but in the municipal hiring process, I'm sure it'll take long enough that it'll be well past July 1st before I have that person on board, but hope to soon thereafter.
What's the anticipated salary of that position? Can that be shared? And how does that compare to other towns and cities around us?
So the question was, what would the salary for the position be, and how does that compare to other cities and towns? And I don't remember the number off the top of my head. It is the same salary level as the other senior planners in the department. And this, you have a little bit of flexibility, but generally speaking, it's the starting salary for that. I would say there's a wide range of salaries for transportation planning in the region. It depends a little bit on the level of qualifications. So, for example, there might be a transportation engineer who's a certified engineer that comes with certain levels of experience and expertise that probably you wouldn't find typically as a planner. And I would expect that to probably be paid more. I don't know if you gentlemen want to weigh in either on what transportation planners are paid in your town.
I'm not going to talk about that. I wanted to jump back a little bit because we're on the transportation planner for a second, and I think obviously Steve's done a lot more thinking about this, but as somebody who's also pushed for the creation of the position at the town hall, I think that one thing I'd really like to see with that position is some of this transportation demand management discussion that I brought up earlier in the introduction. If we are going to implement some policy in Watertown where a developer is required to make reports of what their single occupancy vehicle impact is on the community, and then regularly have some sort of monitoring and then goals for reduction and then potentially consequences, that's not something that we can just expect is going to happen by itself. And obviously those policies don't exist yet, we're still working on those, but I'd like to think that the transportation planner will play a big role in that.
Sure.
We've got a question from the back here.
Hi, my name is Chris Clemens. I'm actually from the town of Waltham. Okay, I guess my question, well, it's not really a question, it's more like just a concern or comment or whatnot. I take the 78 bus, it's very horrible. It's bad. And, I was trying to get down here today on that bus, but then I missed it. It's very inconveniently run. MBJ is just bogus. And obviously, it needs to be changed. A lot of buses in my town of Waltham are hardly ever used, and just they don't run very often. And even now, the last bus just left at 6:45 from Watertown, and it still sucks. So I guess my question is, and they're also putting the new fares in July 1st. I just feel like if that's gonna happen, why do we have all these delays? And it's just not right. Okay, thank you. Yeah. So if you want to just maybe think about it.
And if I can just broaden that question a little bit to what can we in one town or anyone else in another city or town do about these MBTA problems? So, thank
I'll stand up. We've done work for the MBTA at Nelson Nygaard. We do work with a lot of other transit agencies. It's no secret that the MBTA is fiscally constrained. You know, hardly any transit agency anywhere in the country certainly sort of makes money. I mean, it's public transportation for a reason. It's subsidized. The fare recovery, or what the fare covers, is typically, 20%-ish of what the overall cost of running the service are. So I say that just as an understanding that the MBTA itself is completely challenged in its ability to add buses or add service, and they would be the first to tell you that there's a need for additional service, not just in Watertown, not just in Waltham, but in many of the communities that they're at. All right, great. What do we do about it? I mean, the first thing is you need to support more funding for public transportation, right? You can do that as an individual, you can do that as a community, you can do that in all of the channels, you can do it as a voter, you can do it in all the channels that you have available to you. If you want more service, you have to advocate for more service generally, and then I think within that, you have to advocate for more service for the particular needs that you have. Just as you're got 60-plus people to a meeting here tonight to talk about this, in another town, in another part of the region, there's a similar meeting going on, I guarantee you, where people are asking for the same thing. That's something you sort of need to pay attention to. I will say one other thing, if folks follow what the Fiscal Control Board, which is now the Oversight Committee for the MBTA, is doing, they're having discussions about taking a wholesale look at how their bus operations work and what that means. You can go online, you can see all the presentations, you can understand what those discussions have been. They need support in order to do those things, right? It's a decent amount of money to do it, but there's a lot of the routes that are overcrowded. There's a lot of service that they have out there that is probably not serving the purpose it once served. It's been a very long time since the MBTA has taken a comprehensive look at where its bus routes go and who they serve. And having run the meetings where you're talking about taking bus stops away or service away from one place and adding it to another, which is right now all they can do, those are not fun or easy conversations, right? So everybody wants more, nobody wants less. You have to advocate for more, but you also have to understand what some of those trade-offs are. I think that sort of thing is certainly something that, as a community, can be done.
And if I could just add one thing to that, I think it's important to think about the impact of services like the T and advocating for that to the state. It's not just about, the ride on the bus over here was, you missed the bus because it was full, or it didn't come on time, or there was lousy service. Much beyond that, the state is advocating for a major increase in the number of housing units created in this region. And they need to do that in order to support the jobs and the economic growth in this region. That makes a lot of sense. If you do that, and the transportation system that serves it just crumbles and fails, we've gotten nowhere. We've gotten nobody anything. So I would encourage you not only to advocate for that, but advocate for it in a number of different contexts, so not just transportation.
I just want to quickly, I know it's not the topic, but the 70 bus, it's something that's come under discussion quite a bit in Watertown also. We noticed how it is, and it's in the conversation with the Arsenal Corridor study that we have underway. We had at one time been promised a special study or analysis of the route to perhaps break the 70A and the 70 up a little bit, and then we were told that they were going to wrap that into the greater Arsenal Corridor study. If you come to any of the Arsenal Corridor meetings, or if you have access to a computer where you can send comments in to the Arsenal Corridor planners, tell them that matters to you, because that's something that's really important to me as far as that study goes. And I don't know if you've talked about that in Waltham, but I think that's, there's some efficiencies to be gained by looking at those two routes.
A question from the back, I just want to mention in the context of what Steve was just saying. Northeastern University just came out with a report for the organization A Better City, which concluded that in the so-called inner core area, which includes Boston and Watertown and some other municipalities, I think the ones represented here and some others, they projected that by 2030 there would be a population growth of 17.5%. So, question factor.
Well, that actually ties into what I was saying. We've been planning for some of this growth, actually, we've been allowing these mega projects to go on in Pleasant Street, condominiums there, and Arsenal Street, the projects that are going there. And yet now we're worried about the roads. It seems to me that this is very reactive. Why do we allow these projects to go in before we figure out how we're going to handle the increased traffic? The other thing is, we know where the problems are. They're quite obvious. You know, that Arsenal Street is a problem, that Orchard and Common is a problem, Route 16, Auburn, North Beacon, and Route 20. These are the areas. We know what the problems are, and I'm not sure how much, I know we need to study them. We should really digging into these. We don't need to identify the areas. Finally, the improvements that were made in the Common on Belmont and Trapella Road, they look better, but it's calm to the point of being dead. Traffic in the morning is impenetrable. You can it's backed up all the way to Cushing Square. It would take an hour to pass through all the way to get to 20, to 16 over into Cambridge. The islands that we've created, you can't see at night. In the winter, it's going to be completely unable to navigate. I can see, how many cars can hit all these islands in the middle. I'm complaining a little bit. I'm complaining a lot because I live here, and this is, you live here. We feel a bit more proactive and understand this. Let me just add one last thing. That on the Trapella Road, there's no protected bike lanes there. It's like as if there was no thought at all to bikes. You talk about wanting to reduce, single passenger cars. Well, one way is to increase the bike lanes. You're not protecting them. It's scary out there. These are the complaints. You've heard these, you know these, but I want to be heard.
So I would say a couple things to that. And maybe I'll take the last one first. In terms of the Trapella Road project, Belmont's not here, so.
Talk about it all you want.
I will say one thing, though, about that project. I think there's always a challenge when you're doing a pretty substantial project like that. And, I think earlier we talked about some of, taking away a bus stop. And if that's your bus stop, you're concerned about taking away that bus stop. The example with Trapella Road, I think there were some situations where there could be intersection improvements that were proposed that would have helped. Some of the residents in the area didn't like the impacts of the improvements. For example, almost making Templeton Parkway one way. Well, the people on Templeton Parkway said, no, we don't want Templeton Parkway to be one way. So as a result, the improvements that could have happened at that intersection didn't occur. And I think that would have helped substantially in operation of that intersection. So, I think it's a challenge. You always have to balance those impacts, locally with the broader impact. In terms of development in Pleasant Street and development on Arsenal Street and the impacts that had, I would suggest to you that we're not just allowing the development to go on without any thought to what the impacts are or solutions to that. I think very much we're thinking about that and trying to mitigate the impact of these individual projects as they occur, as well as thinking about the broader, longer-term solutions like implementing a PMA or that's an example where the developers in some of those projects are committing to financially paying for shuttle service that will serve the public. And obviously, that's not going to solve all the transportation issues, but it will certainly help. And then lastly, again, I would go back to the suggestion of level service A is not what we should strive for. That's an inefficient construction of an investment of our dollars to have an empty road. We should expect and have some congestion in our facilities if they are being sized in a way that the investment matches the impacts that we have, and should expect that.
Thanks. I'm Joe Porter. I live in Watertown. I have a question about transit and parking. On the parking, I heard a number of towns mention that they're adjusting parking to try and have a higher price in the high demand areas and spread things around. I wondered whether any of the towns that looked at the San Francisco experiment called SF Park over the last couple of years, where every couple of months they adjust parking prices up or down based on demand, so that every block has a few spaces free, and then maybe that's some company that'll give you the meters to do it. Because, first time, long run, it just seems like it, since so many people are talking about that, that looking ahead of it is the technology might let you do that more, would be a good idea. On the transit, then, it was up on the list, but I didn't see in any of the diagrams any efforts that are being made to try and make the transit that's here so it work more efficiently. So, for example, Trapella Road, you lose a lane and all, but there isn't any cutout for bus stops so that you can pass the bus when the bus is there. So it seems like, yeah, you can do traffic calming, but if traffic calming is just slowing everybody down instead of prioritizing in a way that makes the whole thing work. So I just wondered whether in the plans that we're talking about within our town here are coordinating whether there are any real efforts to take MBTA, whatever it does, and just enable the buses to go down and fast.
So I'll just speak quickly on the parking side of things. San Francisco is certainly one of the examples that we looked at, and we looked at our pricing scheme for Newton Center, and something that we'll ultimately be looking at in other parts of Newton as well, which is exactly what you were describing. Higher price in the most desirable locations, lower prices in the less desirable, and also adjusting that pricing. We're not going to be able to do it at this point in time on a monthly basis like San Francisco has the capacity to do, but ultimately we're looking ahead to the future as more and more people who are utilizing parking in Newton are using apps, phone apps and those types of things. Then we have data. So as I said a minute ago, we're I think as of earlier this week, we're now phone app enabled across Newton Center, and I think several other villages as of earlier this week. And ultimately, we'll citywide, you'll be able to use a phone app to pay for parking in Newton. And again, as more people move that direction, the more robust our data set will be, and the more we'll be able to use that data to then adjust parking prices as appropriate. Yeah.
And it's absolutely the right sort of model to think about. San Francisco is an extreme example. They also got $25 million of federal money to implement their program. But the lessons learned from there in other cities, and James is talking about managing to an availability goal, right? So that you set the goal early through the process. We want to make sure that, there's 10 to 15% availability, which basically breaks out to one space per block is open. When I drive up there, there's a space for me to park in the place that I want to go, and using the pricing to adjust that. If there's never a space available, the price is too low, you should raise it. If there's always 6 spaces available, your price is too high, you should lower it. So it's monitoring that over time. It takes an enormous commitment on the part of the municipality. It takes a commitment on the part of the public. And I'll tell you from having done many of these studies here in towns in Massachusetts, setting up the municipal policy that allows those changes to happen on an ongoing basis is not easy in a lot of towns, and I'm not sure what it is here in Watertown. If you want to change the rate by 25 cents, if you want to extend it from this block to that block, you have to go to town meeting to get an approval for that. That is not an efficient way to manage your parking system, right? So you have to think about an overall plan that says this is how we want it to work, this is how we're going to manage it over time. If this happens, we're going to do this. If that happens, we're going to do that. Setting those pieces up through a comprehensive study is absolutely the way to go. I think that's the real lesson learned from San Francisco and from other places. You had a question about the transit side, and I talked earlier about, so let's just call it street allocation. The street is a public space that's trying to accommodate many things. In some places, you may want to ensure that transit is given some kind of a priority, whether it gets an advance at a traffic signal, whether it means that there's a space for you to wait for the buses and there's appropriate pedestrian accommodations to, if it's a heavy use bus stop and there's a shelter. All those things are choices that you should be looking at in terms of how you design an intersection, a corridor, a neighborhood. You have to think about how transit fits into there.
I just wanted to mention that in this year's capital plan for Watertown, kind of buried in there is a line item for new parking meter technology. Something that I'm kind of excited about. It'll be coming to the Public Works Committee meeting pretty soon, where we're gonna once again look at this technology of kiosks in municipal parking lots tied to new meter heads along the streets. And with that new technology, we're also hoping to implement some of that pay by phone technology. And also, when you have that kind of high-tech stuff, you can do the kind of analysis that we're talking about here about demands, and you can also kind of quickly manipulate the pricing as that comes along. And that's something I've been really excited about. There's a little bit of reluctance, I think, and maybe I'm using the wrong word there, but because of the nature, I think Watertown Square is a little bit smaller than some of these other areas, and maybe you guys can tell us what you think about that, but maybe there isn't a whole lot of kind of different zones to consider, but it's something that I think we'll be seeing a little bit, and it's already in the budget.
And I can obviously speak from Waltham's perspective. We're looking to implement a lot of the things that you hear up here. Our old way of thinking was, okay, we have paid parking here, here, and here. We've set the rate across the city, and we're going to go with it. We have a commuter rail station that the lots are just packed because that price is way too low. I talked before about Moody Street and how we're a little bit backwards on how we're dealing with on-street parking. So I think we're not going to get to San Francisco's level of block by block and month by month being able to tinker it, but the basic concept is what we're looking for. And 15% is actually the target that we've been looking at. So at any one location, 15% of the spaces are available. That's kind of where we want to be. So we want to set the prices accordingly. And also, I think hopefully by next month, the Waltham is also going to have payback phone.
Respond to your question there. I'm not going to pretend to know Watertown Square well enough to know how many zones could be accommodated there, but I'll say that Newton Center is not terribly big. And I'll say that the majority of the area is in what we're calling Zone 1, and then we've identified a very slim kind of sliver of area outside of that that's the second zone. So they don't have to be kind of equal-sized zones or whatever. It was just recognizing that there was a band of paid parking that was just outside of the most convenient part of Newton Center, that it made sense to charge at a lower rate. So, and that may exist. So there may be room for more than one zone.
Hi, have you reviewed, elaborated a little bit more on the calming strategies for Watertown and specifically what are the changes?
Could you speak in the mic, please?
I'm sorry. I was asking to elaborate on the calming strategies, which we're going to be looking at Watertown, the approach to calming traffic, and specifically also on Golden Street changes, and how similar or different would be from the Bella Road.
So traffic calming is a broad term that we use in a lot of different places. So, for example, Waverly, where we put in speed tables, is an example of traffic calming. Where areas where you might have bump outs, where you'd shorten the crosswalk, where nobody's allowed to park, adjacent to an intersection anyway, or where there's a crosswalk anyway. By bringing the sidewalk out, you shorten the pedestrian crossing and make it much safer and much more comfortable for a pedestrian to cross. So those are examples of traffic calming. Another example that I'll mention is a lot of people get uncomfortable when a street is narrow enough and you have parking on both sides that there's only one lane for travel. And sometimes you might have to wait and kind of jockey between parked cars. A lot of times residents don't like that. That is a very effective traffic calming measure. It keeps the traffic slow. You're not zipping through the neighborhood. And because of that, we are reluctant to eliminate parking on one side of the street, to open it up and give people a clear shot. As it relates to Mount Auburn Street specifically, what we've talked about is eliminating lane of traffic in most of the corridor, keeping turn lanes at the intersections, at the major intersections, adding a bike lane, widening sidewalks. So in a lot of ways, very similar to Trapello Road in that sense. And one other comment I'll add, somebody mentioned that Trapello Road didn't have, or Belmont Street didn't have bike lanes. That will have bike lanes once it's finalized and final painting is done, so it just hasn't been striped yet.
If I could follow up on that with a question about dedicated bus lanes. How does, for example, the Trapello Road changes with the lanes, the fewer lanes, the buses and cars have to share those lanes, and that, of course, makes it, well, it doesn't help the buses get through. So what are the thoughts of the panel about dedicated bus lanes on major arteries with their bus routes?
The challenge with that is that where bus lanes help you the most are the places where there's the most traffic, right? I mean, that's always the issue. If you have a street or a corridor that flows pretty regularly, a separate lane isn't going to give the bus much of an advantage. But in places that are congested, in places where the bus is often stuck in traffic, those are the places where you need it the most, and they're the hardest places to get it in there. Some of the tools or tricks of the trade that we look at sometimes are how many people are actually being carried in the buses versus how many people are being carried in the cars, right? I mean, a bus is a very efficient mode of transportation. It may carry 20, 30, 50 people at a time, which takes up a lot less space than, you know, the 40 or 50 cars that it takes to do that. So if you're thinking, again, anytime you're looking at a street, you're allocating that space accordingly. You know, if there's a need for that higher level of priority for buses, or we're determining through some other reason that that's important, then that may cause you to say it's more important to do that, to make that accommodation here than it is to accommodate something else. You can look at also other trade-offs that you can make. Oftentimes, you can remove parking, and that creates added space for buses, but that's, again, another trade-off that you're looking to make in a corridor. You can eliminate turning lanes, so where today you can take a left turn, maybe those things go away, and that creates added space that you can then allocate for buses. But it tends to be very contextual in terms of how you make those decisions.
Hi, I'm Diana Crowley. I'm someone that does not own a car and rides totally on public transportation. So my questions have to do with the shuttle system. You're talking about implementing in the town of Watertown. I imagine it's going to be on the main streets like Arsenal and at Auburn Street. So I'd like to know in terms of the shuttle, what's the frequency? Is it only for rush hour traffic in the morning, in the evenings when people come home from work or go to work? How who's going to pay for this? How much are the citizens going to have to pay to ride the shuttle? And along Arsenal Street, will the free developers and Athena contribute to the cost of the shuttles to defray the cost on the citizens of Watertown?
Yeah, so paying for it, but obviously they're going to pay for it another way through the developer of the project. I think initially it would be a service that will serve the major corridors and be primarily a rush hour service. I think it would be pretty, several times each morning, several times each evening, at least. And I think to the extent it's successful, we can build on that and perhaps make it more frequent and more wide, a more wide area served. I don't think it probably makes sense to serve a lot of the other areas of town that aren't adjacent to one of those corridors, just because the ridership wouldn't be there to support that. But as it goes, as it develops over time, maybe that would make more sense.
Just briefly, there's a consultant that's been hired by the town to put that whole thing together. And Diane, next Wednesday at 7 p.m. in the first floor of the town hall, they're going to give a presentation on their progress, which may include routes, may include schedules, all sorts of fun stuff like that. So that's a committee meeting Wednesday, the 7th, the 22nd, on the first floor of the town hall.
I have a trip on traveling to Costa Rica that night. I'm sorry. You should tell me earlier.
Crimea River.
I was there. Probably less traffic.
The question from the front.
This is a really great panel. I really appreciate tonight everybody's efforts coming together. A lot of great information. I'm excited to hear about the changes in Newton. I go to Newton a lot, and those 2-hour limits, there was some tough enforcement there. And I love the different zone because you go the same areas for different reasons in Newton Center. And I think it's a great way to support business. And I'm hoping in Watertown, we have to analyze everything, but, small businesses, like you said, different reasons to go and different amounts of time. One thing that really impressed me is the amount of public participation in all these efforts. And I'm really impressed with the collaboration with different parties and public comment periods and kind of, people say charrette or drawing, active feedback from the users. And I love the demonstration project in Newton and talking to people on the street because, I think a lot of us need to get out of our offices and our daily routines and just hear from, all sorts of voices and the people that are on the streets, in the buses, on the bikes, etc. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about how Watertown can really engage citizens. And I think a lot of people are working really hard, but we haven't quite come together yet in really working on a more unified vision. So I think we'll get there, and thanks again for the forum.
Just a question as I get to the other side of the room. I'm wondering, for each of the municipalities represented here, do you know or have a sense of what share of travel is done by single occupancy vehicles? And do you have a goal of what that share should be?
I'll start with Waltham. I know our consultant has the number. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it's very high for single occupancy vehicles. And obviously, the more we have, the bigger traffic problem we have. So we do have a goal of reducing that number. We're implementing bike lanes where we can. We're trying to work with the MBTA and come up with some of these solutions for transit to improve that aspect of it. We're building sidewalks for pedestrians. We're, again, trying to be smarter about parking, so someone can park in one spot for multiple destinations rather than drive to each one. So there's a lot of things we can do to kind of think around the edges, but realistically, that number is going to remain pretty high. I just hope that I get it down a little bit. In terms of targets for reductions, we're working on that number. We don't have that number right now, but we do. The city has implemented a number of policies that are meant to address that. We have a complete streets policy that's really meant to balance all modes of traffic, vehicular, transit, pedestrians, bikes. And we're no longer in the business of only emphasizing vehicular traffic. And I think that's kind of the way the transportation industry is going. Look at it at all the different modes of traffic and really try to optimize it all.
As it happens, I have a page from our fact book right here. For Newton residents driving to work, the commuters, it's 73% by car. And just for completeness sake, 13% use transit, and that's lumping bus and train together, and 4% are biking or walking. As I said before, 9% are actually working from home. And then for workers who are commuting into Newton, it's 81% who are driving.
Sorry, just to confirm, that driving number is whether they're alone in their car or in a van or in a carpool.
It is just alone. It's the carpool number looks like 1%. So yeah, and this is I think we've talked about. We've thrown around the transportation demand management (TDM) acronym a few times. That's one of those things you can encourage through TDM is carpooling and those types of activities. So as I said, it's 81% for the the employees who work in Newton or commuting to Newton. Our target is not finalized yet, but we're looking at overall bringing it down to 60%.
I'll just say one more. It's important to note that even the information you have there is journey to work data, right? So that's census data because it's the most readily available, consistent data around. Think about your own lives. That journey to work is a small part of all of the trips that you make in a given day. There's plenty of people that you're going to school, you're going shopping, you're coming to meetings like this, you're going to the library, you're doing a whole bunch of other things. And the beauty of places like Watertown and lots of the inner ring suburbs here in Boston are that you can make a lot of your other trips without using a car. And you need to set up the conditions to allow that to happen. All the other trips that are part of your kind of daily life that happen, within, a couple of miles of where you're starting out, all of those other options become a lot more readily available if the conditions are right. If it's easy to bicycle, if you can walk across the street, if you feel safe, if there's a bus or a circulator or something else that can take you to those destinations. So the common sort of understanding when you do transportation planning is everybody always thinks about planning for that trip to work and that commute. That's a small part of the life of your community. You have to think about all those other components as well.
I want to echo that point. It's an excellent point. And what I know is one of the things that we looked at is we realized pretty quickly that the schools are actually a major contributor to our transportation, to the transportation congestion issue. Our estimate is that the Newton school system is contributing roughly 10,000 trips a day to our streets between students being driven to and from school and staff and faculty. So we actually did a survey through our Safe Routes to Schools committees on how kids are getting to school and finding overwhelmingly that kids are getting to school by family vehicle, despite the presence of school buses, despite the fact that many of our schools are in walkable neighborhoods. So that's actually one part of our strategy is we're looking at how can we introduce TDM measures, transportation demand management measures, into our school system for staff, for faculty, and for boosting that Safe Routes to School effort. So another thing to think about.
I'm in the mediocre tough sell plan, and we certainly would be interested in anything that would reduce the volume of cars coming into our facility, shuttles, public transportation, things like that. So we'd certainly be interested in more information on the shuttle that you had mentioned. Do you have any updates on the bike path that would continue from Arlington to Fresh Pond?
Sure, that study's...
It is now 8:30, and the Watertown Library will be closing in 30 minutes. Thank you and good night.
The design is ongoing and in getting near completion. I think there's a very recently a meeting scheduled on the 30th. Or did it just happen? It just happened. Just happened. Obviously, it was one of the ones I wasn't at. But so it's progressing. I think they're looking at construction next and lining up the funding for that. I don't know exactly when it's going to be constructed, but it'll be fairly soon. I don't know, Deb or Janet, if you had an update on that.
No, you're right.
Okay.
We did have a 75% design.
So 75% design is done, getting close. Yep.
Angie Pinellas, counselor from the East End. I need to quote one of our longtime traffic commission members who has passed on, John Bartley, and he would very often say, it's like putting 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack. And that's what we have. It's not only the major intersections that we need to look at, it's our neighborhood intersections, our unsignalized neighborhood intersections. Mr. Magoon was correct in saying that the neighbors in the Templeton Parkway area oppose the reconfiguration of Templeton Parkway at Belmont Street. Yes, it may have made the egress point a little bit easier and signalization a little bit easier. But where were those vehicles going to go once they actually entered Templeton Parkway? They would be flowing to Kimball Road, so that would be the intersection of Kimball at Mount Auburn, which is signalized but needs vast improvement, or Templeton Parkway at Mount Auburn Street, which is designated no left turn during the commuting hours. That was implemented about 12 to 15 years ago. Or going to the intersection of Mount Auburn Street and Arlington Street, which is absolute chaos. Or traveling to any of the other unsignalized intersections through the neighborhoods. Since the Belmont Street project is nearing completion, from Keenan Street during the commuting hours, I cannot exit my street against traffic. And I wrote that email, and some of you may have received it, to Senator Brownsberger, and he in turn sent it on to the engineers. So we are now being forced to go through neighborhood streets. I'm doing it. It's my only means of getting from point A to point B. The islands in front of the Oakley Country Club, I've been told that fire rescue is not able to actually get safe passage when there are vehicles in queue because the area is just too tight. That was also sent along to Senator Brownsberger, and the response was that the information was being sent on to the engineers. These are very serious issues. The main route for fire rescue from Station 3 in Watertown to the east end of Watertown is Belmont Street. So I've been told by residents that they have seen fire rescue with a delay of 20 or 30 seconds at particular areas. So does that mean that the response is going to be increased to the east end or anywhere else? Because Belmont Street is also the main route to Mount Auburn Hospital. So these are issues we all need to look at. Prior to, fine, it might look wonderful on paper, but put it in reality, put it in life, and it doesn't always work. My email to Senator Brownsberger, I was attending the meeting, and Mr. Magoon was there at the Russell Center in Cambridge on Huron Avenue. There was no way that I could take a left-hand turn from Keene Street and merge into traffic on Belmont Street. I went to Cambridge, went to Hallworthy Street, went around that way. That was the only way. In the morning, I can't get out of Keene Street and that whole street for any of the other streets. So if access for residents from Templeton Parkway, if they could not exit Templeton Parkway at Belmont safely through the traffic signals, they'd have to go to Woodley or Westland and go against traffic, encountering the same issue that I would have on Keenan Street as well as all of my other neighbors. So these are very serious issues. So we cannot only look at the major intersections and say this works on paper, because it doesn't always work in reality. Traffic from the health in the last meeting, we were told that 20% of their traffic will be going to School Street at Belmont. The vehicles are queued up at least 10 during the commuting hours. So 20% more of Athena Health vehicles are now going to be on School Street. I don't know how it's going to work, but we're bursting at the seams. So we all need to work together on this. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Helen Brown. I've got just an observation. One of the things that I've heard you talk about is about how, I don't know if it's the majority or quite a huge number of the cars that are going from one point in Watertown to another point in Watertown don't actually originate in Watertown. So while the public transportation within Watertown is really important, and while shuttle buses and all that are really important, and the parking in Watertown is important, we also need to figure out what to do about the cars that aren't going to be using public transportation going through our town and might be coming from Weston or Wayland or wherever else they're coming from. And working with our neighbors, not just in Waltham and Newton, which is great, but also in Weston and Wayland to figure out, are there ways that we can mitigate that travel so that there's park and ride or something to do so that they have ways to get through our town that don't impact our town like they're just only going to continue to do. Thank you.
It's a good point, and certainly something we'll continue to work at. I haven't thought about reaching beyond, our next abutters or two, but you're right that a lot of those commuters from even further out, a lot of the ones that are going through Watertown on a daily basis.
If we can find out where they're coming from, if a study can be done to find out where those cars are coming from going through.
And I think we can, get that to some extent from, from census data or from, license plate data. I think the bigger question is what to do about it. And at least in my mind, the bigger solution to that are some of the broader policies that encourage people not to drive by themselves. And that, comes through some of the things we've already talked about tonight. Programs employers have to encourage people not to drive or to drive together, things of that nature. The other thing that I think is important for, a town like Watertown to consider is, so you have all these people from other towns driving through your streets. Do you do things to try and discourage them from doing that? Which, if you are successful, it's probably going to make it a lot more painful for all of us. Another way to look at it is do you try and slow them down a little and encourage them to stop and take advantage of businesses and economic opportunities that occur in town. And I'm not saying that's necessarily what we should do, but I think it's certainly something to think about in terms of how you treat particularly commercial corridors. And if cars are whizzing by, they're not even recognizing what businesses are there. If they're slowing down, they might not only recognize them, but take the opportunity to stop and do business here.
We're getting towards the end of our time. Just a couple more questions, and then we'll call it a night.
Thank you. So I have a kind of a specific question about the shuttle, and I understand there's a meeting next Wednesday. Is that right? Unfortunately, it coincides with the ZBA meeting, so I won't be able to be there. But what's one to do? I guess in a general sense, when we talk about a shuttle and how it can best benefit Watertown, is the idea really to sort of supplement or improve the service on corridors that the MBTA already services, or is there ever thought to sort of connecting nodes that might be perpendicular, say, to MBTA lines? For the most part, they run east-west, like 71, 73, 70, but would there be thought of maybe connecting the point, like using School Street or Common Street or Waverly or anything like that to really make more of a grid out of the areas that are served?
And it's unfortunate we won't be able to be there Wednesday. I think Patrick Sullivan, who we're working with in setting that up, would have some probably better answers than me. But I think our initial thought is to serve Pleasant Street and Arsenal corridors. Pleasant Street largely not served, Arsenal Street served but underserved, and primarily commuter routes. I think if we tried to serve perpendicular routes to that, I think you'd do two things. You'd make it a much longer trip, a much more circuitous trip, which people in those corridors would not appreciate. And secondly, you probably wouldn't get a lot of ridership. While we are a relatively small jurisdiction, our width isn't that great, and to the extent that there is service in the Trapella Road and Mount Auburn Street corridors, how many more people are you going to pick up by having that perpendicular service? I think that again would be something maybe we could look at in the future, depending on how successful we are. But I think initially we probably want to serve those primary corridors.
I don't have a question. I think we're wrapping it up, but I wanted to, I think John will do a formal thank you to the members of the panel in closing, but I wanted to take advantage of this just for a second and ask some of our folks, I know a lot of them have left, but we're trying to get a sense of how we're doing as a task force in terms of communicating. So I wondered if people would just tell me quickly by showing of hands, how many of you heard this via email about this event? How many heard about it through the newspaper? And
Nobody reads it anymore, Tony.
So most of you heard about it through email from one source and another, is that right?
Notified me too.
And how many heard about it through the town's email, the town's website? Okay, thank you very much, appreciate that. Thank you. Oh, and one final notice, those yellow cards that some of you did or didn't fill out, if you'd like to be on the task force's mailing list, email list, and we only bother you once every couple of weeks with an email, please fill it out, and if you have any comments about the program, please write them on the back, and there's plenty of cards in the back and plenty of pens to use. Thank you.
Okay, well, that wraps it up. We'll have another library announcement in just a few seconds. I really want to thank every member of the panel for giving so generously of their time tonight.